Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. As of this recording, the Indian election results seem pretty much settled. The BJP has won, according to most, if not all, exit polls. Even the Pakistani Prime Minister has tweeted his congratulations to Narendra Modi for winning these elections. But it's important, isn't it, to look back at how the campaign has been, vis-a-vis sloganeering, vis-a-vis violence, vis-a-vis the ongoing issues with the electronic voting machines. There's even a website, in fact, indiaevm.org, which talks about concerns about those electronic voting machines. And of course, the biggest issue here for many around the world would be how minorities will be treated going forward, and if they should now be even more concerned about what the next tenure under Modi will look like within their country. To discuss all of that a bit further, we're now joined by Sonia Sarkar, who is a journalist. She's joining us from Delhi. Also joining us from Delhi is Priya Virmani, who is a political analyst. And from Hyderabad, joining us is Amer Khan, who is an analyst and news editor at the Siyasat Daily. Amer, Priya, and Sonia, thank you all for joining us. Sonia, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of these results?
Well, it's all very clear that there's a huge victory for BJP. But as Modi started his campaign before 2014 about building a new India. So, of course, in the 5 years, we can see he has built a new India. But his new India is not being built on development as he projected it to be before 2014. His new India, which has voted for him, is being built upon polarization, communal hatred, and chest-thumping muscular nationalism. So I think in front of our eyes today, we are just seeing our new India. That's what I can make out.
Priya, what do you make of that? Because, you know, certainly while there are concerns about how Modi and his team played the communal card, can we just explain this win through that? Or do you think the BJP was able to connect with the common man for other reasons as well?
Let's put things into perspective here. Indians have very unequivocally and decisively voted today, and their voices that they want to take pride in a singular nationalism. What does this mean? They are conflating nationalism and economic progress and development together, and they see Narendra Modi as the charismatic, brave, courageous, decisive leader to achieve and deliver both. Let's put things into further context. Last year, 2018, we saw the lowest income in 18 years for farmers. We saw the highest unemployment rates in 45 years. Yet, despite these indicators, and these are government figures, Narendra Modi has come back with not just a decisive victory, but with an unprecedented historic mandate. Why is that so? That is because they have seen that some of the economic reforms he put in, such as demonetization and the GST, the goods and services taxes, people have seen the intent for this is bold and visionary, even though short-term pains have been humongous and disproportionate amongst the Indian people across the spectrum, right from the common man there were stories of a common man dying in the queues to the bank to get his money changed, to the Indian entrepreneur with a stash of black money who was also hurt. Because of his decisiveness, people see a sense of leadership in him that no other leader in India is offering, especially the opposition that is weak, uncharismatic, lackluster, and no real.
And I wanted to pick up that point, Priya, if you allow me, because that's a very good point you just brought about the opposition. Amer, I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because, you know, I've been seeing a lot of Indians that are posting on social media have said that at least those who are not necessarily pro-BJP have been contextualizing this as the fact that the Gandhis really were not able to connect with the Indian people. Do you think that that is a fair point?
Yeah, I think when we are talking about the weak opposition, I think opposition is probably not getting connected to the grassroots. Sitting in an air-conditioned room and deciding the course of action, or being carried away with the input which they are getting, that's where I think they are lacking. And of course, we had a long election schedule, but in that the main points which my predecessor, the two people who have spoken, Sonia and the other lady, she has spoken.
Priya, yes.
Nobody talked about the unemployment, the GST, monetization. Everybody carried on with just the slogans of Chaukidar Chor Hai and kind of stuff. Whereas Modi had laid emphasis on, when he talked of nationalism, people started believing him that Modi could be the person who can take on whether it is Pakistan or can take India further. So that kind of socialism which they were talking of, or the nationalism which Modi was talking about, people started again believing him, forgetting the GST and monetization, which has hurt lot of people in India. But of course, the new India which Modi was talking is now, I think, a broader division of India is happening in India.
Okay.
So, and I think that is not good for India, because we believe that India is a bouquet of flowers where Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Parsis, everybody live together. But unfortunately, we are probably on the same route which Pakistan was long time back, and probably is the same case now also.
All right, so let me pick up on a point you made there, Amer. Sonia, I wanted to bring you in and ask you, Sonia, about this something that Priya brought up as well, and that is about the decisiveness that Modi has shown. Because, the numbers don't lie. If you're looking at the Indian stocks, they've hit record highs as Modi just began leading in the exit polls, in fact, and they're record highs, in fact. So do you think in some ways, Sonia, that Modi is actually good for business?
Well, but what about the unemployment that we have seen, that 6.1% unemployment rate between July 2017 to June 2018, the highest since 72, 73. What about the farmers' distress, the debt, the suicide? As Priya pointed out about demonetization and the number of people who died just waiting at the ATM queues. What about GST, the job losses because of this introduction of GST? So we really don't see this. I mean, in the past 5 years, we haven't really seen any huge growth in economy. But talking about your decisiveness of Modi, of course, I mean, this decisiveness factor also comes again from, from the very idea that this barrel-chested man is going to save India from all its quote-unquote enemies. It just, the entire campaign, the narrative around Chaukidar, adding this prefix to their Twitter accounts. I mean, again, we are going to save you. So when you create an enemy in a mind of people, of course, people would love to have somebody save them from that enemy, right? So that BJP has done brilliantly. Nobody really cares if there are job losses, if there are farmer suicides, if there there's unemployment and people are in very bad shape. There is no LPG connection and subsidy that they were supposed to get that they got, or the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, the toilets that were supposed to be built, they don't seem to be anywhere. Still, they would vote for Modi. So
okay, so let me pick up on that, Sonia, because that's a good point. Priya, I wanted to bring you in on this because, Priya, earlier you mentioned that the opposition was weak, and as I put to Amer as well. Do you think it is that the Gandhis simply weren't able to point out these very obvious facts, as all of you have made these facts quite obvious? Why weren't the Gandhis able to ride on that wave? What did they do wrong, do you think?
Speaking, Rahul Gandhi is not a politician. He might be the sign of a political dynasty, but he is not a man for the job. He just does not possess the charisma, the communication skills, the analysis skills, etc., required for the leader of the world's largest democracy, decisiveness, boldness, courage, etc., which Narendra Modi ticks all these boxes just in his persona and personality and temperament. And then to add to that, rather than putting forward a robust and visionary developmental plan for India, Their entire energy was spent just on trying to oust Modi, and I think that has backfired spectacularly. Both the incompetence of Rahul Gandhi as a leader of the main opposition party, the historic party in the world's largest democracy, and their lackluster sense of a campaign. And thirdly, the BJP have demonstrated huge discipline of their party apparatus and their election campaigning strategy, which wasn't evident at the Congress camp. And fourthly, 73% of all donations that have been recorded thus far to major political parties have gone to the BJP. Their spending on social media is also in excess of £2 million, whereas the Congress party have just recorded 35 million rupees. So overall, their campaign strategy, their leadership, their social media interaction, all in all, it's no surprise that they have come up with such a historic winning mandate today.
Okay, so Amer, I wanted to bring up, in fact, in this campaign in the lead up to these elections, according to the New Delhi-based Center for Media Studies, about $7 billion was spent during these elections, and that is more than the $6.5 billion which was spent during the American presidential and congressional races of 2016. What do you make of the fact that there is so much money at stake in these elections?
Yes, we are a billion population, and we have a big population where we are fighting elections, and so many parties and so many candidates fighting elections. So I think, yes, it's a process, election process, and we are just going that. But if you go by that, I think last election, 5 years back, it was just 4,000 crores or something, which were spent on elections. And this year it has gone up to 50,000 crores or 7 billion, which you're talking of. So compared to America, I think we are a different economy, and every 100 kilometers, the language changes, the food changes, every preferences changes according to the, if you go by the distance here in India. So I think being a vibrant economy, yes, we are spending that amount of money.
Sonia, I wonder what you make of that kind of money that's been, is that good or bad for democracy? Because, even when it comes to American elections, that's always the concern and criticism, isn't it? That much money is being spent on just getting candidates into office. What about what they do after getting into office?
I remember as for Election Commission, as of April 25th, this year, around 3,166 crore worth cash and contraband has been seized. So you can understand the amount of money that's been seized, and that's the black money. So a lot of talks on demonetization it's just an attack on the black money. Apparently, a lot of black money has been used in the elections, but is it good, bad? Who cares now, honestly? Because this is that we are seeing the mandate now. We have seen when a large section of people are voting. Let's not say that every voter is voting because they have taken money from the political party and they've voted in exchange. No, but of course in India it is. But polling is also about money, liquor, muscle power. So that it's not new, but of course the amount of money that we are putting in now into elections is huge. It's far more than what even happened in 2014 elections.
Okay, so Priya, I wanted to put a two-part question to you that make A, of the money that's being spent in these elections, and B, about the concerns about these electronic voting machines. As I put in my introduction, there's even a website called indiaevm.org, which lays out point by point the concerns about the electronic voting machines and how they are susceptible to fraud of all kinds. What do you make of that?
Firstly, the humongous amounts of money spent that are just on this inexorable rise. It's really a travesty and a tragedy that a country that so urgently needs money spent on development is really got this large financial machinery, both black and white, more black arguably, behind its electoral process. Nevertheless, this is the practicality and the reality we have on the ground. And notwithstanding that, now that we have a clear mandate in place, let's put our hope and faith that it is going to work for the betterment of the people. And I feel people have put their faith and hope in this mandate, and they are going to hold Narendra Modi to account now to deliver more on things like land reform, labor reform, tackling the debt in the banking sector, all these factors, making India more investment friendly. He's now going to have a report card to deliver on all these factors. And I know the people this time will be watching more closely and more hopefully and with greater faith. They feel that if there's anyone in this country who can deliver, the only person for this top job is Modi. There is no one else currently in the electoral map that comes anywhere close to Modi in India. In fact, since the victory started becoming clear, the one message that has gone viral on WhatsApp and social media is a James Bond-like video made by someone with a tiger in the background and Modi in the foreground, and the musical score is that from James Bond. And that really personifies how people today are seeing him. They're seeing him as a Goliathan leader, not just in India, but on the world map, and one like India has not seen in many decades.
Okay, so Amer, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is, of course, the concern on the parts of minorities in India and the communal violence that we have seen recently, and not just in the lead up to these elections, but throughout the years of the Modi tenure, his first term, that is. How concerned do you think, Amer, that Muslims and others in India should be in the years forward?
Yeah, Muslims are a worried lot, and people were hoping that he would get a secular government. Of course, but I think it's the mandate given by the people, and we have to accept it. And probably, I think we'll fight for our rights. I think, of course, yes, the vulnerable sections of the society have been facing problems, especially in North India, when it came to whether it was Akhlaq or whether it was Pehlu Khan. Yes, we had certain bad incidents, but yes, we are here and we are going to live here. You cannot just delete us from the country. So we'll fight for our rights. Of course, now, yes, people are worried. People have prayed for a secular government. Of course, whether it is Modi or whether it is Rahul Gandhi, it's the same situation for us. Of course, but the concern for security in the day-to-day life has risen because of in the 5 years what happened. And the next 5 years, of course, we don't know what's going to happen, but we hope that everything would be better in this 5 years.
Okay, and Sonia, what do you then make of the concerns of minorities? A, are those well-founded concerns, and B, do you think things will only get worse now?
Well, when I started, I actually mentioned about this new India, and
yes.
Let me tell you, this new India elected Pragya Singh Thakur. She's an accused in 2008 Malegaon blast, which had killed around 40 people. And she hailed Nathuram Godse for killing Mahatma Gandhi. And it was all during her election campaign, she said all that. And she won by around 3 lakh votes as per the fresh reports. And this new India also elected somebody called Tejaswi Surya from Bangalore, a 28-year-old lawyer, again with a huge margin of over 2 lakh votes, I think more than that. He in fact tweeted by saying that that was again when he was campaigning, that BJP should unapologetically be party for Hindus. Now, this is the India that we are talking about, right? So is this situation going to be worse for Muslims? We really don't know, but there are huge challenges now for Modi. The challenge is to make India safer for Muslims. It is a huge challenge also for the media now to ask him questions. 5 years, he has not had a single press conference. Everybody was waiting for him to not just address the media, but take questions from the media, which actually asks the tough questions and the right questions. But now I think the challenge is now to face the people. People should hold him accountable and media should hold him accountable. So only to keep this country secular.
Okay, so Priya, what do you that? Because certainly, Muslims are a vital part of India, and whether we're talking about external enemies, perceived enemies on the part of the Indian government, such as Pakistan or others, that's a separate argument, isn't it? But these are Indian citizens we're talking about, Muslims who are Indian. Why have they been made the enemy, and why has that? What does that mean, do you think, going forward?
Just a couple of points. Firstly, when we talk about the Indian media, I would say now it's so fatalistic to even, watch Indian television or read Indian news, because beforehand, you know what the ideological position is, and they are, touting for either BJP or the Congress. So for the media to ask real piercing questions and to be robust, as Sonia just said, I think the media need to shine a light on themselves as well, because in India now they are entirely ideologically motivated. That would be my argument, one side or the other. Secondly, coming down to the question of the minorities, India, as I said, by and large has seen a shift in taking a certain pride in their identity, which they are conflating with economic progress. They are conflating with being more Hindu or more nationalistic in that sense, with that rhetoric, with being economically progressive. And Modi seems to be a lodestar, seems to symbolize both these aspects, which the majority India is latching on to. Having said that, there have been cases, for example, in Gujarat, where some of the Muslims have voted for the BJP because they themselves have seen economic progress. So I do hope that, as Modi said, that, he will now build a more inclusive India. I can be hopeful for that. But the ground reality is we will have to wait and watch. Having said that, even in earlier secular India, I feel the BJP has arguably done by day what earlier secular India has done by night. So let us now be hopeful, not only on the part of the government, but hold each and every one of us responsible for being more inclusive in our everyday lives.
We'll leave there as our final word. But of course, we appreciate all of your time, your insight and analysis. That was Amer Ali Khan, news editor at Siyasat Daily, speaking to us from Hyderabad. Joining us from Delhi was Priya Virmani and Sonia Sarkar. Priya is a political analyst and Sonia is a journalist. And of course, like I said, we appreciate you taking your time out of a no doubt busy schedule for you all today. Now, viewers, as our guest spoke about there, this is the new India, as Sonia had put it, that India where Modi has now come back into power, especially since he's already been in power for 5 years already. Concerns about really communal violence and how he's been able to play up divisions within the country to come back into power remain. He hasn't been able to deliver on many of his economic promises as well, such as unemployment and otherwise. And that then remains a concern as well. So if he's just building up hate for the sake of building up hate, will that actually help India and its Muslim and or even Hindu citizens, really? And then going forward, what does this mean for the region? What does this mean for relations with Pakistan? Prime Minister Imran Khan tweeted that he hopes that Modi's win would in fact usher in an era of peace and that Pakistan and India can work towards peace, lasting peace, that is, of course, as Prime Minister Khan has repeatedly said. Will that occur? Then we have disturbingly some signs such as Netanyahu celebrating Modi's win. Why would Netanyahu, who is part of a right-wing government in Israel, be celebrating a Modi win? What does that say about the kind of friends that Modi keeps around the world? We'll keep a close eye on those developments here in Scope, but I'll be back with our next segment after this break. Stay tuned. Thank you for staying with us here in Scope, viewers. Now, the Australian election result has had, without the fact that it was a surprise result in and of itself, has had a result which was completely unexpected, at least globally, and that is of suicide attempts on the part of refugees housed at Manus Island. As we know, Australia sends off refugees, holds them at Manus Island Detention Centre. That's off Papua New Guinea. From what I've read online, the approximate number of cases of people who have attempted suicide there at Manus Island ever since Scott Morrison was given another tenure in office as Australia's Prime Minister is about 10. That is according again to activists and refugees themselves. Officials of Papua New Guinea itself give a much lower number. But no one is in doubt that this occurred because these refugees were hoping for a Labour win, and a Labour win would have meant that possibly they would have signed on to what New Zealand had offered to take in 150 refugees a year, I believe it is, and as well as, of course, treating these refugees a tad bit better than they have been. The Morrison government, of course, doesn't even want refugees to be brought onto the mainland for medical attention as well. To discuss this a bit further, we're joined now by John Kane, who is a professor of the School of Government and International Relations at Griffith University. He's joining us now from Queensland in Australia. And we're also joined by Dominic O'Sullivan, who is an associate professor of political science at Charles Sturt University. He's joining us now from Canberra in Australia. Dominic and John, thank you both for joining us. John, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of these suicide attempts? Certainly, it's disturbing in the face of this election win, isn't it?
It's very disturbing, and it'll be upsetting for the government. I haven't had much response from the Australian government about the issue yet, or any confirmation of figures. It's not altogether surprising, I suppose. It's conditions in there are very bad, and I'm sure that many of the I'm not entirely sure that if Labor got in, that they'd have been much better off. Certainly, they were looking for New Zealand as a solution to the problem, so maybe that would have happened. But I can imagine the despair that greeted the Morrison victory.
Yeah, and Dominic, what do you make of that? What do you think really done going forward at this point on the part of the Morrison government?
Well, I think the Morrison government's position is pretty clear, and that's why there is being such despair reported on Manus Island, with reports, as you say, of 10 to 12 suicide attempts since the election on Saturday. The Morrison government plans to repeal the medical evacuation legislation that was passed against its will when it didn't have a majority in the parliament shortly prior to the election, and that allowed two doctors to certify somebody was requiring medical treatment that necessitated removal to Australia. That can, under the legislation, be overridden by the minister, but only on very narrow security grounds, whereas there was no such provision previously for medical intervention. And the Prime Minister has indicated that repealing that legislation will be one of his government's first priorities. Now, it does have the numbers in the House of Representatives to do that. It looks like it will hold a 2 to 3 seat majority in the lower house, but it may not have the numbers in the Senate, the 76-member upper house, to get that legislation through. So it'll be very interesting to see just how hard the Morrison government pushes that issue, how much it tries to negotiate with some of the smaller parties in the Senate.
All right, so John, I wanted to ask you a general question. I don't want to say every single Australian's point of view is anti-immigrant, but why do you think that a majority of Australians, or many Australians, hold such views, and why would they not want these sorts of refugees to be given their due rights?
It's a political issue. It goes back to 2001, really, when John Howard was Prime Minister, and this is in the wake, remember, Australia's had problems. It's had detention since the 1990s of illegal immigrants or refugees. It became an issue after 2001 election. John Howard was running for election, and an affair blew up at sea. You may remember the Tampa incident. Norwegian ship picked up 400-odd refugees and wanted to take them to Christmas Island. And John Howard saw it as a political advantage to say, no, we're going to protect our borders, you're not allowed in. And that kind of was the key moment, I think, turning point, where it became a political issue in which Australians took sides. And many, many Australians thought, yes, we must protect our borders at sea and that sort of thing. And Howard won that political argument, really, and helped get him re-elected in 2001.
And do you think that's a legitimate, do you think it's a legitimate concern on the part of us, John?
Well, they've always been concerned. It's a kind of a wicked problem. They don't want people getting into rusty, leaky boats and drowning at sea, as many have. And they don't want people say, but how do you stop them? And their answer to this has been basically cruelty. You'll get to Australia, or you won't get to Australia. You'll be put on one of these islands in Nauru or Manus, and the conditions will be horrible. And that will deter other people who are waiting in camps in Indonesia and other places in the Indian Ocean from getting on board these ships, paying lots of money to these people smugglers and getting on board. So it's a kind of cruelty argument, cruel to be kind, I'm sure Scott Morrison would say. And remember, he was the immigration minister who really stopped the boats, as he's very proud of saying. Labour got caught by it because when the Rudd government came in 2007, promising to shut down Nauru and Manus Island, the boats started again. And you had drownings at sea and you had more refugees. And so it became a perfect political football. They had to retreat on it under the Gillard regime, and they had to open up these offshore detention centres again. So it was, they're caught, they're kind of caught in this horrible thing. You're treating people badly, you're overriding their rights, but what do we do?
All right, so Dominic, what do you make of that, as John put it, being cruel to be kind?
Well, the images of people drowning at sea on these unseaworthy boats that had come across from Indonesia were certainly very powerful. And they allowed a political narrative of that kind to develop. And profound cruelty is evident on Manus and Nauru. The stories that are coming out from people who've worked there among the refugees and smartphone video footage that's come out certainly shows desperate conditions and no real hope of resettlement elsewhere. And that has certainly stopped the boats, as was Tony Abbott's slogan when he was campaigning for election in 2013. It was a very effective three-word slogan, stop the boats. And in some ways that imagery of the people drowning at seas masked over some of the prejudice that was really underneath a lot of the public objection. Australia has relied on immigrants for labour since the 1700s, and it still does today. There's labour shortages, so the rhetoric about people coming in and taking our jobs is simply fanciful, but it's a powerful political rhetoric. It works. People believe it. People driving into work on the highways in Sydney and Melbourne, for example, facing traffic congestion, find immigrants an easy scapegoat.
But certainly, Dominic, if I may come in, Dominic, because you made the point about the economic advantages of having immigrants come in. But then I wonder, the argument about national security is a valid one, isn't it? No country can just allow open borders completely, right? You need to have some checks and balances.
Well, you do, and those checks and balances, if Australia chooses to follow them, are available through the various United Nations refugee conventions and other legal instruments. So, there's no compulsion on Australia to accept people as refugees if they are a security risk. But there's no evidence to suggest that this is widespread. One of the rhetorical statements that was used by the Prime Minister when he was opposing the medical evacuation legislation earlier in the year was that this legislation opened Australia's borders to rapists and pedophiles. Now, there was no evidence at all that people who may be in need of medical evacuation fitted that category. Yeah. It was simply a political tactic to engender fear among people and to position the government as being strong on border protection. And that's been part of its political strategy for some time.
John, I wanted to ask you then about the economic benefits in general of having immigrants come in, because this is an argument which has been used in many parts of the world, hasn't it? Even in Europe and even the United States to an extent, where immigrants take our jobs and, they're eating up our welfare system, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that's a valid argument, or as Dominic there put it, John, that immigrants actually help economies and that Australia is in fact going through a labor shortage?
Well, we're an immigrant country, always have been since white settlement. Our situation's much like the American situation, in which, yes, immigrants are a source of enterprise, wealth, labor, etc., etc. John Howard had it kind of both ways. He was accused of stopping the boats and stopping illegal immigration at the same time as he was encouraging skilled immigrants to come in from abroad to fill places that Australians businesses couldn't fill. So I was trying to have the best of both worlds. These arguments always go on, of course. There's another argument that goes on here in crucial kind of electorates, which are particularly in West Sydney, where there's lots of immigrants or migrants communities. And curiously enough, they always show up on polls as being most supportive of this border protection issue, because they see these people, and of course this has been sold as a political point, they're jumping the queue. And these people didn't jump the queue. They went through the overseas processes and with all this difficulties, and they've come here legally to Australia, and they kind of resent, and they've been encouraged to resent these so-called queue jumpers. So there's a lot of, Australia always says it's welcoming, and the Liberal national government particularly say, look, we're one of the most generous nations in the world for accepting refugees. Immigrants, skilled immigrants certainly, but also refugees. We have quotas. So they must come, all right.
Yeah. So, Dom, I'm wondering then, when you have such rhetoric played out by the government, and I imagine by the media as well, as I've noticed there in Australia, I imagine that deters even those who are skilled immigrants from coming into Australia, because I imagine they're concerned if they'll be accepted or not.
Well, as I understand it, Australia doesn't have any difficulty in filling its immigration quota. Certainly in some sectors of the economy, it's difficult to attract skilled people, but across the board, Australia's population is very multicultural. The number of languages spoken throughout the community is significant, and from the beginnings of white settlement in 1788, there's been a steady stream of immigration. And that will no doubt continue. But certainly there are elements of prejudice in some parts of the community towards immigrants. Immigrants of colour or whose language is obviously not English. There are cases of people being harassed on the train, for example, as they travel to work or go about their business. Certainly, on Australia Day, for example, the country's national day, that tends to bring out an awful lot of white nationalist rhetoric that shows an unseemly side of Australia, but not necessarily a side of Australia that's dominant or widely accepted. But certainly there is a racism to be exploited for political gain, and political parties do that.
Right. Very well. We'll leave that as our final word, but of course we appreciate both of your insight and analysis. That was Dominic O'Sullivan, Associate Professor of Political Science at Charles Sturt University. He was speaking to us from Canberra. And we were also joined by John Kane, Professor at the School of Government and International Relations at Griffith University. He was speaking to us from Queensland via Skype. Gentlemen, we appreciate both your insight and analysis, of course. And viewers, as both of our guests spoke about, as John said, the Australian government has not yet responded to these suicide attempts at Manus Island. But of course, it has made its point of view very clear when it comes to illegal immigrants, these refugees at Manus Island, saying that they should not be given even medical attention, if need be, on the mainland in Australia. As John there put it, it's being cruel to be kind. That may be one way to see all of this, because a lot of these refugees attempt to cross over into Australia on rickety boats, which are not seaworthy, and many of them die in that attempt. But certainly this puts into question then this whole argument of how welcoming Australia and much of the free world is, the democratic world, however we want to term that. And can these refugees just sit for years on end, really, at PNG or Nauru Islands in those detention centers, while the people around them don't even want them there. Can Australia continue to ignore its responsibilities when it comes to international humanitarian law, et cetera, while, of course, balancing its concerns about skilled immigration coming in instead, as well as, of course, national security? We'll keep a close eye on that, how that situation develops going further, but that's all for this edition of Scope. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.